Hey everybody, welcome. Today we're going to spend a little time going over some of the homework regarding Alexander Hamilton's financial program, and this is pretty important because it is the beginning of the economic growth and foundation of the United States. And you know that Washington chose Alexander Hamilton as the first Secretary of the Treasury. And so I wanted to spend a little time talking about those 5 elements that I asked you to read about and then write about in your notebook. So we'll go through each one of them, and we'll start with the first one that talks about establishing the new nation's economic worth. And this really, 1 and 2, the creation of a national debt, kind of go together. This is super important because when a country, whether it's a brand new nation or has been going on for thousands of years, people need to feel a sense of trust in the economy. And we can certainly appreciate that today in 2013 with all the economic troubles that America is going through. However, as a new nation, Alexander Hamilton wanted to start us out on a sound footing, a good solid foundation based on the fact that people trusted that the country's economic growth was inevitable, that it was going to happen. So he does a couple of things, and I know it sounds funny that creating debt would be a good thing, but if you think about it in this way, when you have debt and you can pay it off, that shows that you have great capacity for growth later on, that you are good for the money that you say that you owe. So that's exactly what Alexander Hamilton was doing. He tried to show people that the American economy would grow if people trusted in it and that the federal government could pay off its debts. So one of the things he does is he does something called assumption, and that was in your reading, where he tells the states that what he wants them to do is to give the federal government all of the bills that they have to pay from the Revolutionary War and let the federal government take care of that. And if you think about it, assuming those debts would free the states up to grow in their own right, give them the freedom to be able to invest in businesses and have really strong state governments and not worry about owing money to other states or to other countries for that matter, or to investors about the Revolutionary War, because that's long gone. So by taking on these debts, okay, these debts are replaced by new interest-bearing bonds that creditors would invest in. And if the wealthy are willing to invest in it, it would show that they have a trust and a belief in the economy of the United States. This was very, very important to have that credit worthiness in the form of new currency, one type of currency that the entire government was founded on. Being able to put out loans to people and know that the loan money would come back. Being able to put out savings bonds, I'm sure you've gotten some savings bonds in your lifetime, in which the government would take people's cash and then give them this bond, this IOU that says, not only will you get your cash back, but you'll get it with interest. So, as I said before, you might think, well, debt is not a good thing. Owing money is not a good thing. Well, not if it's so much and you can't pay it back. But the government was really sure that what they could do was to take on debts, but also get people to invest in the government in these savings bonds and allow them to use their cash to pay off some of the debts and grow stronger and become a really strong competitor in the world markets. So Alexander Hamilton was very, very smart in doing this, and it really made a lot of sense. Add to that, number 3, a national bank, creating what's known as the Bank of the United States, which technically was not supposed to be connected to the government. It really was supposed to be private, but it really became the main financial agent by which the government could create their currency, control how much currency was put out into the market. It would hold the public funds. You got to have a place to be able to put the government's money. So this is one thing that it did. To make loans and to pay interest to investors, hopefully making a profit. So the Bank of the United States was to be sanctioned for 20 years, and at the end of the 20 years would have to be restarted, re-sanctioned again in order to continue. So the national bank was very, very controversial. And one of the things we'll talk about is the bank being made at all through the use of this elastic clause. And Alexander Hamilton believed that through the elastic clause, that's number 18 under Article 1, Section 8, that the Congress had the right to create a bank, and that it was a good thing for the people. It was a law that was necessary and proper. But there were many people, not Federalists, but Democratic Republicans, who really felt the opposite, that the Congress really had no right to create a bank. There's nothing in those 17 clauses of Section 8, Article 1, that says that the Congress can create a bank. So very, very controversial, and I'll tell you a little story as we end our notes today. But the National Bank, nonetheless, was put into place, and Alexander Hamilton thought that it was going to be a very necessary and important institution. The fourth thing he did was to create an excise tax on whiskey. And we talked about this already, a luxury tax, an extra tax on the producers of whiskey, because rather than take their grain and take it to the coast to be, sent to mills or to other countries, and that was quite a burden to take all that grain to another place. They decided to use the grain and create something out of it right where they grew the grain, and that would have been whiskey. And as a result of that, they were what they felt were penalized by having to pay a tax on whiskey, which was a product that they chose to make. It started this whiskey rebellion, which you should have read about, and we talked about during class last week. And then the last thing was a tariff. Now this isn't just any old tariff or tax. It's a protective tariff, which was a tax on imported goods, and what it was supposed to do is make foreign goods more expensive, thus making Americans not want to pay more for foreign goods, but be willing to pay less for American-made goods, for American-manufactured goods. And so this really encouraged United States manufacturing. And do we still do this today? Absolutely. There are taxes on foreign cars. Does it make people who buy cars want to look maybe at American cars? Hopefully so. So the more taxes on foreign goods that are coming into the country that could have been paid are certainly going to make people think twice about buying those foreign goods and wanting to buy American goods. So this was really to support the growth of industry, of factories that would produce the goods that we needed, just we didn't necessarily have to get them from another country. Maybe there were things that we could have produced here. For example, instead of sending our cotton over to Great Britain to be made into cloth and then it comes back to the United States, would it not have been smarter to take the cloth from the south, send it to the north, where they had mills and factories where they would develop thread and cloth and could make clothes, and then we didn't have to import those goods anymore. That's just one example. So, as I was saying, before we end today, we talked about the fact that this national bank, this whole economic program by Alexander Hamilton was very controversial. And one thing that the controversial nature of this program led to was actually the constructing of the United States Capitol at Washington, D.C. Now, we know we needed a new capital city. We had been in New York City. We moved to Philadelphia. But the states squabbled over what state would get to be able to house the federal capital. And it was an honor. It would have been an honor. It certainly would have been an economic boost of hosting this new government. But in 1790, they brokered a compromise between Thomas Jefferson from Virginia and James Madison and Alexander Hamilton from New York, and resolved the issue and said to the Democratic Republicans, Thomas Jefferson, if you will accept my economic plan, what do you say we put the new capital in Virginia? Well, Thomas Jefferson would have been thrilled. So they carved a little piece of land that they would have called the District of Columbia, somewhere kind of between Maryland and Virginia. And in return, the Southerners, the Thomas Jefferson and his Democratic Republicans, accepted Alexander Hamilton's whole economic program, including paying the debts from the Revolutionary War. And they also said, if you accept our plan, our economic plan, we promise in the North we will not try to outlaw slavery. Ooh, that's a big one. So the capital was named, obviously, for George Washington, and it was laid out by an architect by the name of Pierre L'Enfant from France, and they began construction in 1791. And unfortunately, the executive mansion, the White House, would not be completed in time for George Washington, but would definitely be ready for John Adams. So a little bit of trivia as well, and hopefully that will help you to understand just how controversial Alexander Hamilton's plan was, because without that plan, then we probably would not have had Washington, D.C. where it was. The last thing I want to talk to you about today when it comes to George Washington is the fact just how much of a nuisance George Washington felt the Native Americans were. And if I've said this before, I'll say it again. George Washington was no fan of the Native Americans. And they found themselves, the Native Americans found themselves displaced from their homes and hunting grounds. The more white settlers began to trek across the Appalachian Mountains. And they were still, even though they had, been friendly to the British and were supporting the British in the Revolutionary War, they still kind of felt that connection to the British, more so than to the colonists who now were becoming these new Americans. So the pressure of this movement of the Native Americans really started a kind of a little mini Indian war in this Northwest Territory, which we've talked about. And so in 1791 and 1792, George Washington actually had to take some troops and fight an Indian war near Toledo, Ohio, and it was called the Battle of Fallen Timbers. He actually fought against a very famous Mohawk leader named Joseph Brant. And so the U.S. troops and the cavalry put down the Indians, as you would suspect they were, securing this Ohio territory once again for the United States, and then keeping any more Indian uprisings along the frontier to a minimum. So George Washington, brilliant leader, Revolutionary War hero, first president, not a fan of the Indians, and certainly was not willing to come up with any treaty or compromise to keep them happy and to allow them to have some place for themselves, rather allowing the settlers to push forward and create homes for themselves in this new area that America was was in charge of now. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Make sure you add to your notes. Remember, you are the bacon to my eggs. I hope you have a good night. I'm getting ready to go and watch the Super Bowl, and I will see you in class. Toodles.